One theme we heard in June when we asked, what do you need? Where would you want to see investment? And they said, we need resources to collaborate more.
Okay. And that includes those smaller sort of grassroots.
Correct.
Okay. And I think you'll be coming back to council with an update on the Rapid Housing Initiative, right? I think that's next month?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Can you maybe just outline for me what are the municipal responsibilities in regards to housing under the MGA?
I'll have to get back to you with the exact information as per the MGA. Okay. I know that I can tell you what we don't do is emergency shelters.
Okay, that sounds good.
That's the province. Of course, the federal government has their own housing work that they do through the CMHC, so all the rapid housing, so the affordable housing. The province also has a place to play in terms of permanent supportive housing and transitional spaces. Really, the vein of influence and control that the city has is around how we zone and how we have land available for those housing initiatives.
Okay, but for capital, for construction and that, and for operational, that's other levels of government, right?
For most of those, yes. Okay. But I'll confirm with you via memo if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councillor Tang.
Great. Thank you very much. This is a pretty significant work. Thank you for spending months on this and working with our stakeholders. I guess I have some specific and kind of broader. First, I'm wondering how were mutual aid groups, for example, involved? As you mentioned earlier, the people who are at the table are established organizations. Many of them are institutional organizations. So how are some of those who are not, who are the opposite, involved?
So our initial gatherings were really focused on large service providers, funders, policymakers, sector conveners, because we wanted to talk about sort of governance conversations versus focusing on priority actions. But we have plans in the fall to hold additional gatherings and probably more focused gatherings. So rather than bringing in 70 different stakeholders, curating that so that we can have really focused and in-depth conversations. So that's when those grassroots organizations, mutual aids, a lot of the recipients of the CSWB grant, for example, are really small organizations, and we'd want to bring them together for a focused conversation.
That's helpful. Thank you. And I think we also heard from people who want to do more engaging with non-traditional players, like businesses, for example, and this notion of moving beyond from collaboration to co-creation. How do you see that roll out? Because it's a lot of people in one room and try to facilitate these kinds of conversations and move towards a single collective strategic goal.
Yeah, I would say I really do see the process that we're doing right now as co-creation. So in June, we brought some concepts to the group to say, here's some collaboration models that have worked in other jurisdictions. What do you think? What works? What doesn't work? And their input brought us to where we are today with those three spaces. So I see that as co-creation because they're telling us what they really need. But I think that's part of that open invitation and really clear communication so that people understand when I show up to a conversation, what am I showing up for, what's being asked for from me.
Yeah, I guess the disconnect is that they may not perceive it as co-creation as we've kind of heard today, right? And so I want to flag that.
Yes.
The other thing I was, when I was reading through this, I'm thinking, what are some immediate impact that Edmontonians can feel? So in your attachment 3, you outline immediate, short-term outcomes. Are those the things that you can, we can say, these are some things that you'll start to see if we do the things we say we're going to fund?
Yes, exactly. So we know that that's top of mind. So as we're doing this collaboration work, which is more about the backdrop of how we work together, you mentioned that will really speak to the specific projects, initiatives that people can see on the ground. So for example, expanding COT or the 24/7 crisis diversion program, those received funding. Our community property safety team received funding, and so communities will see those services and those supports in their day-to-day life. And so we want to make sure that we're building on those as the next round of grants go out too.
So on the topic of outcomes, the third part of this motion talks about we need to coordinate funding programs, remove unnecessary red tape, and align outcomes of funding programs. Do we have a common outcomes framework to align those outcomes across different funders?
So how we've approached the outcomes for the strategy is really keeping that community-driven commitment in mind, meaning that we have not, as the city said, these are the outcomes that the sector has to achieve. We focused on our own outcomes, and through the collaboration model, we're wanting to have conversations about what are those shared priorities. We know there's a lot. That was clear this morning. So the short answer is we don't have a set of outcomes that we can say these have been signed on by the entire sector, but we know there's so many shared priorities and opportunities, and that's what we're working towards.
Right, and I think it was a good reminder when, one of the speakers talked about the difference between what we're measuring and also how we're measuring. I think for me, I don't have an issue with the motion. I just think we need a step before that. We don't actually have the tools to do that alignment just yet. And then a quick question for that integrated call, this dispatch, I was just curious, when was this first identified? It was through the Safer for All, correct?
I don't think that was when it was first identified.
Okay.
It was identified well before then as somewhere the city and the different entities wanted to go, but it was certainly validated through that Safer for All report and was a key recommendation.
I think I was just a little concerned because it said another 18 to 24 months before it first, fully commencing operation, and that just feels over 4 years. It just feels really concerning. I'll stop there. I might come back for another round.
Yeah, I'd just say, Councillor, on that, it really is depending on the funding. So we're trying to put together a package for Fall Soba. It depends on what we can afford to do. We've identified buildings, procedures. What we have to do is make that leap in the transition to commit to it, which will cost us in the first year to do it. But then I think the cost will level out to potentially less than what we're paying now for all the different centres. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to acknowledge that Councillor Rutherford has joined us this afternoon. Hello, Councillor Rutherford.
Hello, I've been listening to the whole afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Rice, you're next.
Thank you. I want to follow up on our city manager, your comment. I agree with you. Any implementation depends on the funding level. So that is really important to be aware of it. And so I have one question regarding the funding and listed in the report. And 2003 to 2026, and then I know for the 2023, 2024, we have ongoing, and then we have one time $2.54 million. So where is that funding source from? So for the ongoing is all from operating, and for the one time is from different funding source. So I just want to get clarification on that.
I believe the one time came from the reallocation of CSWB funds, but I'll just want to confirm that's where it came from. Okay.
So that is all under operational.
Correct.
So it's not from from strategy, funding strategy or reserve or anything like that.
No, that's my understanding. Yeah.
So is that city will have continue plan and to ensure this strategy implementation funding will from operating or we are going, so my next question will to the mayor, and then we are going try to get some strategy funding and from different order of government.
Yeah, I would say the use of this money within this city would always be operational use of funding. Where it comes from, I think, with the motion and other things, we'll sort of explore all the other opportunities for sure.
So related to the question to this is about the funding allocation model. And because this funding is specific from our city's operating funding source, and also is a small amount, and compared to lots of larger amounts, and from government of Alberta and from government of Canada provided to our social services. And this is really tiny piece and in that big portion. And then, so then my question is, if we're going to put so much work on it, work pieces on it, and including evaluation from work. So what we would like to expect to see from that? Because the real question is about, with this tiny money, with some small organizations are two-level questions here. The first level, how we allocate this funding, and then is always allocate this funding through the bigger organizations, they receive the funding, they allocate to the smaller organization, or all the organizations at the same level to apply for this funding?
Maybe I'll just start, Councillor, by saying one of the next pieces of work we have to do is to count all the money that in the city-based budget that is being contributed towards CSWB work. What you're seeing in this small amount is really just the added grant funding that was done and directed by council, you know, when we got the strategy approved. The reality is there's many things we do as part of our base budget that we haven't necessarily counted yet as part of a strategy. And I would use, for example, our recreation facilities, which all contribute to the well-being, the general well-being of the population, which I believe are in line with one of the well-being pillar of the CSWB. What we haven't yet been able to show you is every bit of money that in the base budget that's being used towards contributing towards these pillars and some of the outcomes. That's another piece of work we have to do. Once we do it, I think you'll see that there's a lot greater number of money being spent.
So what I heard
in this
here, we have
strategy.
big money. We have big money than just the money in front of us, if you. And so then the next question is about the evaluation framework. We're talking about data collection mechanism, and we are talking about reporting mechanism, and we do understand that accountability piece and for any grant or any funding we give out. But what specific measure you are going to, how you implement that? Because with the small organizations, and even though they receive the funding and they don't have capacity, even they don't have that infrastructure structure in place and to do this type of work, but how we make sure we can measure that progress. So to me, this is a big piece.
You're right, that it's a big undertaking, and we know from other jurisdictions, we've looked at how they've evaluated their strategies, and there's no question they have to be multi-layered. They have to have both immediate kind of short-term priorities for evaluation as well as longer term as the strategy continues to unfold. So right now, what we're trying to do is really look at what are the short-term pieces of work that we can evaluate to tell the story of impact, knowing that we still are in the early days of the implementation of this strategy. And so in out years as well, we'll have more to say about the impact, but we have a few sources of where we can get that data. A number of the priorities that have been funded through CSWB, like the anti-racism strategy or other pieces of work, have their own evaluation frameworks and are doing some of that work right now. Other projects, we're pulling data from various sources. So it's going to be a few different areas that we'll have to look at where does that data exist, what new data do we need to collect, and bring that together. So as I mentioned, it's a number of different layers of work.
Sorry, we're over time. Sorry
Yes,
about
of
that.
course.
We'll go next to Mayor Sohi.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just a few questions. And thank you, Andre, for mentioning that the overall investments that we're making as a municipality, because municipality have much larger role in prevention and early intervention. Like we invest money in arts and culture that deals with some of the recreational facilities, infrastructure, libraries, as Councillor Knack mentioned the other day. Community leagues, how we fund them, they contribute to well-being, anti-racism, reconciliation work that we're doing, affordable housing, and Reach Edmonton. I can list many things that we're doing that actually touch on some of the dealing with root causes of preventing people from falling into hard times. So understanding that $21.9 million of the funding reallocation from enforcement over to prevention. Just want to understand how. I think it will be good to have that bigger picture understanding, but just focusing on that 21.9 million, we have funded some kind of one-time ad hoc prevention type of initiatives, but how are we shifting that thinking that we actually investing that money in a more strategic way, focusing on root causes, early intervention and prevention under the pillars?
It might be one for the team to.
Yes, absolutely. So we've tried to be really strategic in assessing the full continuum of action we need to address these complex issues. So as we've brought forward recommendations to council, we've really thought about, does this fall in an early intervention or prevention space? What other funding is currently in play that may cover off certain types of emergency responses that we know are important too? So that's built into our assessment process, and we're continually trying to find ways we can think in more upstream manner, recognizing that we still need to balance that with what we know are those emergency issues. So that is a big topic of conversation with our community partners, is where is that opportunity for more prevention?
And that is the kind of lens that you're, after conversation with the community organization, that you will apply whatever you will recommend during the SOBA discussions, right?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
And that's what you hear from the community as well, that they want to focus on that early intervention and prevention. Okay. On the shared outcomes, I think that's a very important question that Councillor Tang is raising. Yes, it's going to take some time to develop those shared outcomes. There's different players. You know, there's social sector, then the funders and various funders as well. And how can we utilize some of these tables to come to some sort of understanding on those shared outcomes?
So one thing that we're trying to do is working from a principle of not getting in the way. So some of these tables that come together, they've developed outcomes. So the mental health table is a good example. The youth agency collaborative is another really great example. They have their own evaluation frameworks. They've developed outcomes. What we're doing is looking what they have, comparing those to our pillars and our outcomes, and saying, these match, these align, or maybe there's a gap here, and then working together if there's a gap, but getting out of the way if the work is already happening.
So you're not inventing things.
Not inventing anything new.
Learning from good work being done and then finding gaps where those gaps are.
Correct.
Okay, good. Yeah, those are the questions I had. Yeah, thank you so much. Really, this is not easy work. It's hard work. So thank you so much for your dedication to this. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Councillor Paquette.
Oh, thank you. So we'll be done the work in what, like 2 years? Maybe not. But to follow up on some of Mayor Sohi's questions, you know, when we're talking about community development and primary preventions and things like that and the investments that we're making, have we ever stopped to add all that up so we could say, this is what we're putting toward community safety and well-being, this is what we're, you know, in the context, to be very frank, a lot of people with the defund the police conversation were saying, take money from police, put it into community development and social services so that you don't need so much policing. Okay, that's, the concept is sound, except that that's a generational work on the social services side. Meanwhile, you still need police, but it would be nice to have a number on what we're actually investing in the community development side and community prevention.
Yeah, and the short answer is we have not done that yet, but we're working on it. And I'm hoping that we can present that to council as part of SOBA.
Okay, because if we can display that, and maybe not just like a number in isolation, but that number over time, so we can see how much more we invest, you know, year after year, which I think is likely going to be growing.
Yeah, I would agree, Councillor, and not just over time, but aligned with each of the 7 pillars. We can split it up to show the total, but also what money in our base budgets is contributing to what pillars. Because I think in particular, the well-being and safe and inclusive spaces pillars, we're not showing as much as we should where the money is. Each pillar is a little different. We're very clear on what we've done on anti-racism because it's been very specific and clear funding, but the other pillars we need to work on. So we're trying to do that as
yeah, I understand. It's just a framework. It's a conceptual framework. Not everything is perfect, and if you push any framework too far, it starts to crack. Yeah. Okay. And then maybe, and you know, maybe I'm getting in the weeds here, but when we talk about the continuum of responses, I found that graphic to be very interesting. Do we also break up how much we're spending in each of those continuums? Like, so that we've got our 7 pillars, but we've also got community development, primary prevention, secondary, risk intervention, emergency response. Do we break that up too? Like, look how much we're spending on emergency response, for example, compared to secondary prevention.
Yeah, I think eventually we will, but we've got, again, it's
a work in progress.
Work in progress,
yeah. Okay, All right, just checking. And then the last thing is this idea of telling the story. Now, when we talk about telling the story, we tell the story with numbers and narratives and things like that. One of the things that I noticed, and maybe I'm pulling too much from it, but in social media, for example, City will tell a story. It's a great story. But immediately after, you've got people who are concerned about real issues that are affecting them or they feel are affecting them, and they'll immediately sort of sideline in the comments or in the replies what that story was intended to be. And so I'm wondering if when we tell that story, we consider, okay, what are the potential stumbling blocks here? What are the potential detractions or concerns that people are going to raise? Like, and do we get ahead of that when we're telling the story instead of being left a little bit fumbling, like, hey, what a beautiful day on transit, and then someone automatically says, well, yeah, well, why don't you make it safe?
Yeah, I mean, that has been a monumental challenge and we'll continue to work at. I mean, I've mentioned, I think hundreds of times now at council that, you know, despite all these challenges, we do house 27 or 30 people a month through the programs. Nobody reports that to the media, and it doesn't make the headlines. So, I mean, we'll keep trying. But we have to talk more positively about the things that are working so we can double down and invest more in them. But the fact that we are housing people, the fact that people are getting help, the fact that, you know, there's some programs with youth like the Rajo program that we have contributed in the past to in EPSB that works on youth diversion into positive things that have been really successful. Yeah. But the media doesn't want to talk about them, and I don't know why.
I've got an inkling, but happiness, it doesn't sell quite as well. Okay, I did have one more question, but I'm out of time. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Tang?
Great, thank you very much. So I just want to clarify, and I think that attachment 4, where you do outline, you know, corporate-wide, what are all the investment going to all 7 pillars, very helpful to kind of lay out that picture. But in terms of this SOBA, though, we're talking about the outstanding portion that remains in the CSWB fund, which isn't a whole lot. And you're saying that the community stakeholders are coming up with recommendations for how to allocate that. Is that, just want to double check my understanding.
At one of our gatherings this June, we did raise that we have this unallocated portion and we wanted their input. Okay. So those that were in the room were able to provide some input on that. And as we go along, that's our hope. We'll continue to have those conversations for future funding too. Okay, great. Do you know if it's kind of evenly spread among the 7 pillars? Do you know anything like that yet? Or are you still working on that? So we did theme all of the input, and those 3 buckets, the prevention, early intervention, and collaboration, were what we heard most often. And amongst those, there were all types of priorities, of course reflecting, I think, the expertise in the room and the variety of different work that organizations do. And so just be really clear too, at the SOBA, when we fully allocate the CSWB, you know, that's not the be-all and end-all, you know, recognizing there's still much going on corporate-wide. I guess in a similar vein, in all the gatherings, you know, is there indication from stakeholders if there's like a prioritization of these pillars, given the state of things? So those are the 3 that you're hearing loudest. And on prioritization, I will say, I think there's different perspectives on how we get there. Some organizations have said we really need to take the time to understand each other's work and really have some more deep conversations before we get to what the top 3 priorities are. Others have other perspectives around that. So it's a really diverse group, which is great. But what that means is that we want to take the right time to have those conversations on where the gaps are. But of course, common themes come up around mental health gaps, services, emergency shelter services, and greater inclusion. So I would say many of the themes that you often hear at council are what we're hearing as well. Okay, that's great. I guess one thing I'm curious about, because like how we collect and how we evaluate did come up quite a bit.
in the report, you talked about evaluation that will incorporate Indigenous ways of knowing and equity-based measures. I guess I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that, and how does storytelling and those qualitative data factor into all this?
Yeah, so that's a really important pillar, of course, reconciliation, anti-racism in the strategy. We also have a number of guiding principles about how we want to do this work. So we want to make sure that Indigenous ways of knowing and perspectives are a part of all aspects of the strategy, including evaluation. I believe we're in the process of hiring an Indigenous evaluation specialist, and so we think they'll be a really important part of this work in making sure that the evaluation we're doing reflects our commitment to community. In terms of storytelling, lived experience is really central to everything we're thinking about, and making sure that we're including different perspectives, different voices, different narratives. And so I think as we move along in developing a more concrete plan for our storytelling going forward, we'll be seeking those with wisdom in that area and really wanting to hear from different voices about how we can tell stories in a really respectful and inclusive way. So I would say that that work is to come, and we're just in the early stages of planning that out.
If I could just add 2 examples, though, Councillor. I mean, I think you were at the REACH AGM this past year, where the whole AGM was kind of focused on storytelling. I hope you don't mind, Jan, but it was a great example of how we want to do things in the future. The other example is, I think, with Kitchiaski opening up, we're now going to have a venue to do some of that work with partners as well from an Indigenous perspective. So I think there'll be greater opportunity to do this as we move forward.
Yeah, and of course, not being in the room for the gatherings and the workshop, I guess that's kind of where I assume we will be starting from. So, I mean, I think we heard that from one of the speakers as well, is to kind of center on those the human experiences. Anyways, great. I think the rest I can just kind of speak to it later on, but thank you very much for all the efforts that spent on the strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Rice?
Thank you. I would like to follow on Mr. Cobo's comment regarding integrated resources and for the financial piece. So I do like that idea, and then we implement integrated resources, including financial piece, together to achieve that shared outcome. So do we have a specific action plan and in place, and from administration perspective at the operation level, to reduce that duplication on data collecting and resource allocation, and also reporting duplication? And because I really want to expand that concept if we're talking about the integrated approach.
Yeah, I would say, Councillor, that would probably require a bit more work. I'm less concerned about duplication. I'm more concerned about gaps. I mean, we may have two different partners doing the same work, but I don't think that's duplication as much as it is doing similar work for different groups, different people who need that work. So, you know, I'll defer to the team if they've done more work on this, but I think that would be a piece of work going ahead. But I don't know, team, anything to add?
I'm fine for that. I'm considering my time, because I do have a question to the mayor. I can follow up with you on that piece specifically, and because I think their understanding is not about the duplication of the program, is about we use the similar resources and really reduce the effort on the data connection, reporting mechanism, and the funding source allocation and in certain sense. So I can follow up with you with that. So I do have the quick question to Mayor Sohi and regarding this motion on the floor. So by reading the motion here, I do think the work is needed. This is really important work, and we need to move forward with this. But I want to understand the goal for this work, what we can get out from this motion. We can get the more funding from different level of government, or we are getting improve the efficiency. You talk about the cut red tape, and then also they reduce the duplication and between 3 levels of government, and for similar programs for the resource allocations. I think I'm more interested to get clarification on this motion.
Yeah, I would say pretty much all of them. So when I look at number 1, I think we haven't done the kind of joint advocacy that we can do with the police commission and city council on some of the issues that we have been advocating. I think we've been advocating separately, but not collectively. I think that number one will allow us to do that. On number two, again, you know, there are community organizations that are engaged and they have the data, they have the stories that they tell. I think we will benefit from having that conversation with the organizations to kind of help advance that advocacy work that I'm talking about in part one, right? I think, and the third one, Councillor Rice, I think is very important in a way that I don't think we have, like, at least I have not seen high-level table of all the funders, right, coming together to really look at the way the service providers are coming together. I think that will help us really understand and maybe work better together on the outcomes. It may lead to more funding, may not. It may lead to more coordination. Absolutely, I hope. And it will also lead to shared outcomes that we need to together achieve to make our communities safe and well-being. Yeah.
So the one piece specific I would like to get clarification is because it's three-level government provided. Yeah, I agree with you, and all are funders and provide certain funding for the similar programs. So is there anything and you are looking for there, and we don't need to get into that duplication programs fund? Yeah, and because, for example, and the provincial governments, they may provide lots of funding, and I believe the amount is much, much greater than our city and in the social services side. And then, so is there anything for us, and from that core services perspective, is there anything we want seek very clear boundary and then through this motion, so what we should continue to do, city should continue to, or what we should not continue. So I just want to think if that piece is including this motion as well.
I think under red tape, there'll be opportunity for us to talk about that kind of duplication and what are the other duplications might exist, right? I think it will provide. This is broad enough in my mind. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright?
Hi, thank you. I'm just wondering, Andre had mentioned about the dollars spent on each pillar and how much that's going to amount to. But I'm also wondering how much maybe we're spending on maybe where we're filling in the gaps. And I'm thinking fire rescue services. I understand half of their calls are medical calls, where maybe AHS isn't able to provide the ambulance or like EMS support. Is there any way to break that down and include that in the pillars when you're costing things out?
Yeah, we can certainly look to make sure that we're giving us a fulsome picture of where the funds are going in service of CSWB, and recognizing that there are such broad categories.
Yeah.
You know, and I could probably get Stacey Padbury just to put like the entire city budget, because I'm sure that there's a number of elements. Like really, everything we do is about making sure people are safe and well. So
yeah, if we didn't pick up the waste, it would be not a healthy, well neighborhood. That's right. Yeah. And then I'm just something that sort of struck me when I was going through the reports on attachment 4 about the cost of the Narcan kits. It's over $800,000 I think we're spending in a 3-year period. Can we get the province to cover that under health?
You know, conversations are live as we try to make sure that we all stay in our lane. You know, I think a lot of the conversation I'm hearing today is a desire to make sure that that order of government that has been tasked to perform that service performs that service, and certainly when we want to reduce AHS wait times and things like that, and ambulances and their availability, figuring out how best to respond to drug poisoning, I think is in all of our best interest. So that's a long-winded answer to yes, we're in conversations with the province about that.
Yeah, because I mean, even if we had some safe consumption sites, maybe we, you know, or have people could get their drugs tested in that, we wouldn't have to use the Narcan kits as much. And apparently they aren't as effective with some of the poisoning right now.
Yeah, I can't speak to the toxicity or how effective different treatments are, but certainly I think that the more wraparound the services can be, the more effective.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. That looks like we are done with questions to administration. So we have a motion on the floor. I would ask my colleagues to please sign up if you would like to speak to the motion. Okay, I don't see anyone signing up to speak to the motion. So Mayor Sohi, would you like to close? Councillor Tang, go ahead.
It says it's not open to register to speak, FYI.
Sorry, it's open on our end. We'll just
Oh,
refresh.
good. Okay.
Hold on one sec. We'll add you to the list.
Great, thank you. I think I just wanted to kind of touch on some of my takeaway, and obviously been, like my council colleagues, been following this conversation very closely because it's so relevant and so timely, and it's on all of our minds. And I thought it was very interesting to hear from the speakers today, and I have kind of 4 main takeaways from the things that they have said. And I think, the report really touched on a lot of these, and I just want to provide some encouragement to go further. Number 1 is that piece about co-creation, and I do hear some disconnect, but I think there's future opportunities to continue and deepen some of those collaboration. That piece about engaging non-traditional players in safety and well-being conversations, we've done that before, and I think we need to continue to do that. I recognize sometimes I think the scope of managing and facilitating conversations that big of a scale can be challenging, but everyone is so interested in this conversation. Everyone wants to know how can we all help, how can we all contribute. So I thought that was well timed for us to really be on that path and to do more of that. I think that third piece is, measuring outcomes and outputs, and we have tons of strategies and frameworks, and I think when you have something as big as CSWB, you consolidate it, it's pretty intense, and try to tease out, what exactly does impact mean, can be challenging. But I also heard some feedback around diversifying our evaluation methods. Certainly lots of examples that we can learn from the community already. So again, encouraging us to kind of tease that out. And then that fourth theme around center on the human experience and stories, I think in the report, it talked about that we're going to be exploring how to incorporate lived and living experiences. And to me, that should have been the first thing we did, to ensure that our strategy is really anchored in storytelling, in the qualitative understanding of those experiences and how that shape our notion of safety and well-being. Once again, I know this is just kind of the beginning of that, and so I will just continue to kind of raise those points about how are we centering and not just having a framework and then doing that storytelling piece afterwards. I do see gaps with the strategy and some of the work here. Particularly on the prevention side. I noted that, under the CSWB so far, it's crisis diversion. That's not prevention for me. And I kind of want to revisit back the last conversation about how those two got categorized together. I look at the outcomes, and most of the outcomes under this category focuses heavily on law enforcement. And I don't understand how that's crime prevention. And then, and I think when I looked at sort of the attachment for all the corporate investment on the prevention side, I think a lot of it is still related to enforcement or crisis diversion, that kind of piece. So, I think that's something I'll speak to a bit more subsequently, but I just want to kind of highlight, I think this is really important work. The speakers, thanks everybody for coming out, and loud and clear, lots of takeaways, and this is not easy to kind of hold a cohesive strategy in place, but there's lots of opportunities coming up to continue those conversations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you very much. I just, briefly wanted to say thank you to the team for working on this. I think a lot of my comments and questions come from this sense of extreme urgency in terms of feeling like we need to that there is a crisis and that we need to be taking swift action. But I do truly appreciate the comprehensive and systemic approach that the team is taking. I know in my heart of hearts that that's what leads to lasting and meaningful change. So just want to commend you on continuing to do that diligence and take that approach, even when there are these other pressures. I also really appreciate the approach that the team is taking in terms of being driven by the expertise that exists in the sector. And I really hope, what I hope to see most moving forward is the city really building on and amplifying the great work that's already happening, so that we're not reinventing any wheels, but really elevating and supporting the great work that's already happening. I'm very much looking forward to strategic and focused funding recommendations coming up in SOBA that reflect, the most central priorities that are identified by our sector. But thank you again, everyone, so much for the work, and to the speakers, not only for their contributions today, but every day that they're doing that work for Edmontonians.
Thank you. Councillor Paquette?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to mention, because I hadn't yet, that this is a phenomenal piece of work. It's developing and growing, and from, Frank, 4 years ago now, watching the development has been nothing short of astounding. And the only frustration I have is that our times have made this work so much more difficult. When we embarked on this work just 4 years ago, we did not have the tsunami of issues that we are facing today. And so the fact that we're here already is nothing short of phenomenal. So thank you so much for that. And to the larger point, we do have mounting social issues. They are growing. They're growing in Edmonton, they're growing in every city, they're growing across Canada, the US, Europe, you name it. This is something that is happening, and I, for one, am grateful that our city and our administration, we were slightly ahead of this, because one shudders to think where we would be right now if we hadn't started preparing so many years before this reality has hit us. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Rutherford?
Yes, thank you, Chair Principe. I've been really quiet, but listening attentively for the entirety of the conversation, both with the speakers as well as the question and answers for our administration. And I first and foremost want to thank the community partners for taking the time to be here to share their thoughts. I think it was really enlightening in terms of both opening up and highlighting the complexity in which we're working in this field, but also some of the tensions and some of the clear shared goals and shared vision that are coming to fruition. I also want to thank administration for the shifts and the work that's happened even between now and the previous presentation of this to council, and switching from the constellation model to that model that shows, sort of what is happening immediately with programs and services, what needs to happen systemically, and everything in between. I think it's a much easier approach to understand, and I think it clearly distinguishes that we are both addressing the immediate needs as best we can, and we'll continue to have feedback loops to continue to augment that, while also keeping our eyes on that systemic level. So I just want to commend Ms. Flam and your team for the great work, and obviously good leadership, because you're allowing them to take some risks and try new things and be a little bit comfortable being uncomfortable, which is always the space that you actually create results in complexity. So thank you that. And I'd like to finally thank Mayor Sohi for this motion that is on the floor. I think that, we talked a lot about duplication of services, but I honestly am not afraid of duplication. And something that has struck me when I was in my master's program was the idea that some parts of the body we have duplication. Like if you think about essential services, we have 2 lungs, so that if one of your lung fails, you can still breathe. And I see this as one of those things that sometimes duplication is what we need to make sure that the system is fully functioning and we have a bit of a safety net. And so I think that looking to our orders of government and having those conversations, especially point number 3 on how we can, you know, provide funding in a sustainable way that's accountable, yet removes that burdensome over-reporting and justification that often happens in that social services sector, I think is really brilliant. And I'm excited to see what work comes out of that. So thank you, Mayor Sohi, and your team for putting this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Knack.
Thanks, Councillor Principe. Yeah, I likewise have been, I don't think I've said anything this meeting so far. Just wanted to, again, first by thanking all of you for the work on this, a long amount of work, many different people to bring together, and I thought it was excellent. And I think part of why I haven't had a lot to say, I mean, I've sat through versions of this conversation over the last 10 years now, and you know, Mayor Sohi's asking earlier, or was talking earlier when the questions of the speakers around that sense of hopelessness, and you know, I do, you know, being honest, I sort of feel like I fall a little more onto the hopeless category on this particular issue. And yet, why I wanted to speak is that I think this work is phenomenal, and I think gives us the best chance of success from the work that the city side is. And I am, you know, I feel like even in the last 6-8 weeks, there has been a slightly different response from the provincial government, which gives me, you know, I'm not ready to be cautiously optimistic yet, but I'm ready to be going down the path of cautious optimism, and having what you have created gives me that hope that maybe if there was a chance to make a breakthrough, this is the time to do it because of the work that's been done to date. So. You know, so while I at times have felt hopeless, in particular the last 2 years, watching some of the growing challenges that we've seen, and through no fault of anyone here in this room, everyone here in this room has been working tirelessly to try to tackle these really complex issues at a time where things have been getting harder and harder. So, you know, maybe to Mayor Sohi's point, I'm going to be hopeful today. I think today I'm gonna try to be more hopeful, because I saw the community partners who are here, and they've been working together over the years. It's not like they haven't been doing this. It's not, you know, I see Jan Fox there. She's been doing work bringing folks together. Like everyone who is at this table, who's been at this meeting, has been working hard, and yet we're continuing to iterate and figure out better ways to make sure not just the same voices are at the table. We're introducing those new voices. We're bringing that right set of steps together and the right information together. So, yeah, I feel like today I want to be hopeful, and I want to thank you, Mayor Sohi, for this. I think this motion, again, adds to that feeling of hope that, you know, we've had these conversations. You were sitting at this table as a councillor having some of these conversations, but maybe not in this exact way, and this is an interesting way to bring it forward. So thanks to you for this, and I hope we can really tackle this sooner rather than later. I know it will still take a long time to address everything, but yet I think part of why that sense of hopelessness had come up from time to time is that it's just like, with how bad things have gotten for some folks in our city, and not seeing a huge meaningful shift, it's hard. And you just feel like, especially when you're the one sitting in this chair, and as I have been for the last 10 years, it feels like if you're not making enough progress, you almost have to look to yourself and say, what else haven't I done? Why can't we get this? So, I'm encouraged and look forward to seeing the next steps of this. So just my thanks to all of the speakers today, the community partners who are working tirelessly each and every day, truly tirelessly. It's an amazing what they're doing. Thanks to all of you for putting this together, and we'll keep going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race.
Thank you for today's really meaningful conversation, and community safety and well-being, and for Edmontonians. And I think that is a long-term goal, and also that is fundamental fundamental factor and ensure our city, everything we're doing and work towards and this success. And because we cannot do things and without and ensure our people and feel safe in the city and have that healthy, also good quality life and well-being and in place as well. So I really appreciate this work is taken by our city and moving forward. And as Councillor Picard said like 4 years ago, and right now, where we are right now, we are seeing the progress. And I think the challenge piece is how we do it. And then nobody will doubt and what's important here. And then it's about how we do it. I heard some comment from my colleagues talk about the, encourage duplication, but I would like to say I would like to see less duplication. So the duplication actually, and then even from what we heard today and from our public speakers, and then talk about some challenges and limit competitions, limited infrastructure and limited operational structures. And then we need to find the way and how we support those organizations, those frontline service providers. They are actually doing great work, and how we can find the way and really build that structure, and they can deliver services in the efficient way, effective way, and then but duplication is not the only solution, and we could explore different solutions and really ensure the funding we received, the program we provided, and then to achieve that shared outcomes. So I think that is important to us. And also for Mayor So, his motion, I really appreciate your motion and your team did this. I think moving forward and how the collaboration is not only at community level, because we talked a lot about community collaboration and how we move this work forward, and also the collaboration at the different orders of government. That is equally important and for us, and even from funding model and from shared outcome, from evaluation framework, and we're talking about today, and also from data collecting and share the data, and also from reporting perspective and mechanism, how we have that standardized and reporting mechanism in place, and to ensure our Edmontonians can see the progress and in the way and everybody can understand. And I think all this type of work still ahead of us. And then what's the conversation today will help us to move forward. And then I looking forward to even moving more quicker and more efficient and or more effective. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Sohi to close.
Thank you, Chairperson. May I first of all want to start by acknowledging all the hard work from our administration. Thank you so much. As I said earlier, this is not easy work. It's a very complex work, and it requires a level of tenacity and determination and commitment and compassion, right? And I see that in the work that you're doing today, and I see that in the folks who presented to us. I'm honestly very impressed with the resiliency of our social sector, despite all the difficult time and the pressures and stresses they have faced. They're still there. They're still there fighting. They're still there, giving their best. I think we need to acknowledge that. I think before COVID, our city was, like, we always had houselessness issues, mental health issues, and addiction issues. But I think before COVID, we were making a lot of progress in tackling these issues because of the hard work of the folks who work in the community safety and well-being ecosystem. But I think COVID absolutely changed the impact in a way that we are seeing unprecedented level of social issues that we have never experienced before. And that will require a lot of coordination and a lot of collaboration. And we are seeing, I'm glad that collaboration is happening at a community level among, service providers, people in the sector. And we need to see that collaboration at a higher level too. That's why I'm really, optimistic about this motion, that it will probably lead us to some of those missing gaps in the collaboration that funders need to bring together on their aspect to make this system better and properly support the system. I am glad that our organization really thinks hard about the back end of infrastructure, all the technologies that we need to upgrade, all the HR systems that we need to be in place, and everything else that allows organizations to function well. Public doesn't see that, but that back end infrastructure is so important. Sometimes that doesn't exist in the social sector. Maybe that'll lead to a conversation at the funders table. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, but I really wanna stress this point that our social sector and people who work in this sector are deeply committed to making Edmonton better. And as I said earlier, Edmonton wouldn't be where it is today without their work, and really want to commend that. Yeah, looking forward to further conversations. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Sohi.
Yeah.
And I will ask my committee colleagues to vote now, please.
We have 5 votes.
Please display the vote. And that has carried. Thank you very much for that. Next, I will go to Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Councillor Principe. I'm just going to give the latest wording somewhere here. Here we are. For subsequence, I think this is the right one, yes. The administration lead the development of a violence prevention framework in collaboration with partners as part of the broader community safety and well-being strategy, highlighting key priorities, including but not limited to youth and neighborhood prevention and related funding requirement, and provide a memo midway as an update on this work.
Thank you for that. Would you like to make an introduction?
Well, I feel like I'm doing this technically on behalf of Councillor Tang, so either if she can have those 2 minutes of mine to make a formal introduction, or I defer to her during her speaking to it to let her provide a bit more detail.
Okay, well then I will ask colleagues to sign up to ask any questions. Councillor Rice?
Okay. So for the question specifically, the scope of the violence prevention. So it's my understanding, this is to the mover, Councillor Knack. It's my understanding, and for the violence prevention framework, and we do have different local government already have this framework in place. So I just want to understand what specific scope here we want to cover.
And it'll be tough for me to answer on behalf of Councillor Tang, but I think through some of the answers to the questions that we had earlier, there were a few things I think that were flagged, that were identified, that were maybe incomplete, and that needed a bit more of a holistic, I think, approach would be the word I would probably use. So that's what I took away through some of the questions that were being asked of administration on the work that's being done to date and what still's sort of left. But I would maybe also say it might be worth asking administration if they've got any thoughts on that too.
Specifically, and then for the violence, there are social services already in place. For the violence prevention and framework implementation already in place, and for the family violence, for the other type of violence. So I just wondering, and then for any enforcement regarding different type of violence, not social services violence, is covered here, or that should be different, responsible and by EPS. I
think again, sort of the way I would look at it is that what I took away is that the EPS piece is important, but it's not exclusive to EPS on the violence prevention piece. And I think that's the part there's the gap right now, is that it's primarily focused on the what feels like the reactive side, and there wasn't a lot happening on the proactive side.
Yes, to me, this, like, if I try to get understanding of this scope, one scope of social side is already covered by the provincial and violence framework that is already in place. And then that social side, crime side violence already covered by EPS. So I'm not sure is there any other gap, and maybe like the later on, and then I can get more clarification and from my colleagues on this, because to me this is already covered on both sides.
Can I ask a procedural question? Chair Principal?
Please go ahead.
I think in the past at committee, non-committee members have asked committee members to move a motion on their behalf, and we have always given discretion for the non-committee member to maybe answer some of the committee member questions, right? So I think it'll be appropriate that if Councillor Tang is able to answer some of those questions from committee members instead of Councillor Knack, who just moved the motion, because we have done that in the past too.
Okay, thanks for pointing that out. Clerk Youssef, I guess that is within our
the motion's been tabled by Councillor Knack, so if the committee allows Councillor Tang to answer some of the questions, that's perfectly acceptable, yeah.
Okay, as chair, I am okay with that. Councillor Rice, if you have any questions to Councillor Tang?
I think that is my question, and then maybe it's better way, and it's just allow Councillor Tang to introduce first, and then maybe she can answer my question, and by that way, and because right now is use my time and for my question period.
Okay, sure. We can go next to Councillor Tang. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. So I can kind of talk about it and not ask questions, right? Is that?
We'll just give you 2 minutes to introduce if you
Oh, 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. I'll be brief, and I can elaborate on this later on. Yeah, I think as I mentioned in my closing, I think there are quite, like to me, some major gaps in the report, in particular under the pillar of crime and violence prevention. You know, crime prevention, it's a very specific thing. We're talking about reduction of victimization and reduction of perpetuation of violence. There are dedicated research, you know, particular schools of thoughts it's a very dedicated field. And that's not exclusively, I think, out of the realm, you know, with other levels of government, and municipalities play a pretty key role, similar to CSWB, but also in terms of the coordination, the convening, and the strategic policy side of things. And I think in this report, we see a lot of, I think, mentions of prevention, but that's actually not, I think, what we need in the long term. I also, you know, this is not the first time violence reduction has come up at the city level. You know, 2011, we've actually had a violence reduction action plan that was jointly developed with REACH and EPS, you know, as this is a shared responsibility. And, you know, during the course of implementation, we've actually seen some significant reduction of violence. It stopped because, you know, this work does take funding, and funding did run out as well. You know, I can say more about kind of what does this add to the conversation, but I'll also note that several other pillars like anti-racism, like reconciliation, like well-being have their own dedicated strategy. And we've been lacking in this space for a long time because we've been focusing so much on intervention and crisis management. So I think, you know, it's time for us to do a refresh and actually get to some of the points the speakers talked about in terms of the strategic policy side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll take a turn now. I just have a question for administration. Just with a violence prevention framework, do you have the expertise, does administration have the expertise to provide such a framework?
I think more than just the expertise, we also have those trusted relationships with community. We would not build this framework or action plan on our own. It would be done in deep collaboration with many of our partners. So I'm comfortable.
Okay, great. Yeah, that was the only question for me. Thank you. Councillor Wright, please go ahead.
Thank you. So the motion says including but not limited to youth and neighborhood prevention. One of our speakers here, Deanne, had talked about, from John Howard Society, had talked about the post-release planning's increase, especially in the area of domestic violence. Would that also be included in this report?
I think that as we have our engagements with our partners, I think I don't want to presume what the answers will be, but that we're open to creating a framework or action plan that is most meaningful to the community. And if that's the feedback that we receive, we would absolutely work on that.
Okay. And would that be, I guess, and responsibility, I guess, at sort of at what level of government for these actions as well?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rice?
Thank you. So first question, I need to original mover and then our Councillor Tan. Provincial government has really comprehensive violence prevention framework in place already, and also their ongoing funding every year is annually programs, many programs in place, and millions of dollars in place already. And also from enforcement side and crime violence, and we have the EPS support, we just approved the EPS funding formula to support that work as well. So what a specific problem and for your motion want to tackle? And then what's the gap did you say? And can you be more specific? And what's the problem you want
provincial government also funds housing. We have legislation around public health, and that has not stopped municipalities from intervening in a lot of these cases. It's where the level closest to the ground. We have the ability to work much more nimbly with our partners. Also, just in terms of sharing information, I think, relying exclusively on provincial government on violence prevention for things that are happening at the street level, at the neighborhood level, at the community level, I think is not viable. It's great to see that provincial government has millions of investment, and I think we are the ones who are going to have the power to kind of actually bring that to fruition on the ground. So, I will say you asked what's the problem.
Sorry, I interrupted you here, and
but because I'm not answering your question.
The question is what's a specific gap here?
Right, so that's what I'm trying to get at. We talk about, the report actually talks about prevention remains the most cost-effective and permanent solutions to the challenges we're seeing, but that is not matched by the investments in this area, as identified in the attachment. Moreover, this is a long-term piece. We're not talking about reacting to the crisis we're seeing. This is actually taking the time. This is why the timelines for the first quarter 2025. Youth, for example, is a big part of it. And actually, city, we do fund youth. And I wanted to see this much more under a cohesive policy direction, as well as neighborhood support.
Okay, so thank you for that answer. I didn't say specific, the information will satisfy my question there. But I understand this is great intention, and I really appreciate the intention and move forward for this. So my next question to the administration, with all the other 7 pillars and also all related, like our city manager mentioned earlier, we have other anti-racism or other strategy in place and try to integrate into one umbrella under this strategy. How much money do you say, because this motion specific talk about related funding requirements, and my understanding provincial government is that they have a huge amount of funding and in place, and for many programs and projects related to violence, specifically prevention framework, and to address the youth problem, and we talk about here, including the motion and youth and the neighborhoods, safety, all tons of things. And so what do you say, and from your capacity right now, what's the funding requirement here could be?
So in terms of what the funding requirements would be, I wouldn't know what the answer is to that until we've actually done the work of what that prevention framework or action plan could look like. I've spoken to the team, and we certainly can find the resources internally to do this work in order to assess, the ecosystem of where those gaps are. I think that just like under our current CSWB, under reconciliation, for example, we've got our MMIWG action plan, we've got our Indigenous Framework action plan, so we do have some of those action plans that are bolstering those pillars, and that's how I would see this violence prevention action plan or framework helping us to get really focused on what we as a city can do and what we would point to other orders of government that they need to do.
But if all those work is already in place, the framework is already, what's specific you're going to address? I'm really interested on that.
Well, I think it gives us a chance to get really clear on the prevention side. There is such a tension with CSWB and the limited funds where urgent sort of intervention opportunities come forward and councillors are interested, and we've heard this at different tables, well, can we use some CSWB funding for that? And oftentimes our teams try to push back and say, you know what, let's really focus on the prevention side, because it's easier to talk about the scrape on my knee that needs a Band-Aid now versus let's do the preventative work so I don't fall and scrape my knee in the first place.
So we try to build a larger funding line and to specifically talk about prevention.
Well, I'm not sure that it would be a specific funding line. I think that's premature in this moment. I think we'd want to do the analysis first and then come forward, if required, with that information.
Okay, thank you. My time is out.
Thank you. Councillor Paquette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what I'm hearing is that this is sort of already in the scope of the things that we're doing, but it just gives a particular focus.
Pardon me, could you repeat your comment?
What's that? Oh, I said my read is that this is already within the scope of the things we're doing, but it gives a particular focus to the violence aspect.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So you mentioned missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls. Domestic violence, I'm assuming, is part of this. It's just that the violence part seems a little bit broad, so I'm just wondering how you would tackle that.
Well, on any prevention work, it's how do you create the conditions for wellness in any number of situations, whether it's family, with youth, with our immigrant communities. So I would see it as doing that early analysis with community and partners to really flesh this out.
Okay, and so the idea then, from what I understand, is that you would look at this, take it away and say, okay, working with our partners, what are the types of violence affecting our community? How do we measure that? And then once we sort of have a handle on what that looks like, how do we use city resources to and bring in partner resources to help mitigate this?
Right, and I just want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that city's going to deliver all these services. As we build a city to 2 million, we're about capacity building, we're about convening, we're about consolidating and creating strategy and direction. So that would be our focus.
Collaboration and co-creating.
Absolutely, and we look at other municipalities, so we're not just doing this because we think it's a great idea. It is a great idea, but we're looking at other examples of municipalities, like for example, Boston has a really great prevention program on violence that, we're going to look at best practices. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We certainly will co-op any really great ideas that are already out there.
Okay, and then so when this returns, then we'll get that information, like you'll give us the Boston example so we can take a look at it and things, because I don't want to unpack it all right now.
For sure.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Mayor Sohi?
Yeah, thank you. You answered some of the questions that Councillor Paquette asked about. This will supplement some of the work already underway. Will this also help us understand, the investments that we are already making in the prevention side, which we talked about earlier on in the other discussion around, because, not just on the reactive enforcement side, but also the early interventions that we're making through, Green Shack program, for example, or the programs that are run out of libraries or community rec centers. So it'll give us that sense too, right? And maybe then find some gaps. What do we need to do to
Yeah, I would see this work almost providing a bit of a clearinghouse of what's out there in the community. What are we already doing? I appreciated Councillor Rutherford's earlier comments around redundancy to ensure that a system maintains itself. For sure, also seeing what the gaps and challenges and opportunities would be in that space would be part of this work.
And also learn from other municipalities. Boston is one example. I'm pretty sure there might be some Canadian examples that
Absolutely.
we can look at, right?
Yeah, although I have been told by many of my counterparts across the country that Edmonton does lead in many of these social spaces, but we are always open to learning how to do this better.
Yeah. No, this is, thank you. This is, on many, many people's mind. I think the more emphasis we can give to this at a time, then people understand that we are taking this pretty seriously as well, right? So good. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Tang?
I guess just a couple questions. Number one, would the mover earlier be willing to, and committee be amenable to changing the language around framework to action plan? Because I think that's kind of really what we're talking about here.
I would be, yeah. But I'll defer to the chair.
Yeah, I think that's better for action plan.
Okay, it looks like committee is amenable to that, so
Yeah,
Clerk Youssef? Thank
we'll
you.
reflect that change.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. And then I would just wanted to, I want administration to comment a little bit on the timeline. So this is pretty long. We've been talking a lot about things that there's so much urgency around this conversation. I have my thoughts about the importance of investing time in the prevention work, but wonder if you can speak to your comfort around the timeline.
I am perhaps the most impatient person on the planet. My poor team always feels my squeeze of when. But when I look at the other work that is being done around drug poisoning, around encampment responses and whatnot, I am comfortable with the first quarter of 2025, seeking your grace and mercy and forgiveness. But we are also able to provide update midway to give you a sense of what we're learning and seeing. And obviously, if we're encountering some really great practices that we should be enacting, we're certainly not going to wait and be like, no, we're not going to do that thing, even though it's amazing, until we get to council.
Yeah, and Councillor Rice brought up the preventable violence prevention stuff. Are we effectively tapping into those? And do you think something like this could better streamline some of those policy implementations?
It certainly could, but we'd have to have those conversations.
Do that analysis, yeah.
Of course, yeah.
For sure. And then lastly, because this does talk about funding requirement to kind of implement, I'm wondering what your thoughts on kind of, we're talking, this is separate, we're talking about separate from CSWB, potentially, I don't know. Could this even potentially be for future budgets? I don't know.
Well, what we've done with other action plans is they've come separate for different asks, so we wouldn't be constrained to only do it under the auspices of CSWB, but I certainly do want to hook this work to those pillars. I think that adds to cohesion.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rice?
I just want to first start, and I think I want to give a big praise for my colleague Councillor Tan to change the framework to action plan, because this is actually really reflect what we're going to do. And it's not about the same work and already in place, and all the framework in place, all the evaluations, very comprehensive evaluation framework in place already. And then provincial government and from tons of money already sent out and to the frontline service provider. So this is actually really good change. So I just want to say thank you for that. I do not have too many questions with this change. I don't mind then take this a little bit of time, maybe do this.
Yeah, I don't see anyone else signed up to ask questions. So yeah, please go ahead if you would like to speak to it. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think prevention work, because we always have discussion between the balance point and prevention and intervention, and in terms of the social services government provided. That is a topic and is ongoing discussion and is also ongoing action. And right now for our city to focus on the violence prevention action plan. So I just, without question, I assuming this action plan will cover both social related violence and also the crime-related violence as well, right? So, so it's not ask questions. So I assuming, and also I would like to say, and then if we're going to develop this action plan, so this action plan could cover both of these sectors. So not only one sectors, and by that way, and we will have very clear direction what so city is going to address some root causes and how we to really use this action plan to reduce and to prevent some violence. And then that actually is a part of the reason cast our perception of the unsafe and for our city. So I really want to say that very clearly. In terms of the funding requirements, and I would like to say another point, and because no matter is which level of government is doing the work, and through government, we face only one body, taxpayer dollars. And we have to be really, really aware of that. We face one body of the taxpayer dollars. And then efficiency and how we develop the programs, projects, and the services, and is really needing that collaboration and coordination as well, and because it reduces redundancy. And then I don't think our Edmontonians will appreciate the redundancy, and then as a result, to keep increased property tax. So I want to say that very clearly, and then looking for that collaboration and between different level governments, and also looking for that collaboration and between all the communities and the service providers and all the stakeholders and in this social sectors, and we work together and to address this issue, because I think everyone expect we address the root cause instead of we're more just reactive and more an intervention. And so with that said, I think I'm looking forward to more information come back and in Q1 2025 for the action plan, and even though for the urgent piece, and because right now the public safety and related to our community safety and related to our Edmontonians' well-being and is urgent needs. And even I would like to say that even I could come back earlier for the action plan. When we have that action plan, we have the specific items we can go implement it. And we can go in to take some action and really improve our public safety and for many, many factors, items, and then concerns we heard and from our Edmontonians. Okay, I just want to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Stevenson?
Yeah, just very briefly wanted to thank Councillor Tang for bringing this forward. I think this is an excellent way to, stay within our holistic community safety well-being framework while providing some focus to an area of significant interest and concern for many Edmontonians. So really appreciate administration taking this work on, and I'm really excited to see the results of this work. Thank you again.
Thank you. And Councillor Tang to close. Well, we kind of changed procedure here, so you can go ahead.
I appreciate the indulgence of the committee and chair. Thank you very much. I think also sort of a key takeaway from me from this public speakers today is strategic focus, and I think something like this could continue to help the strategy get there as we kind of focus on the various pillars. I think really what left the deepest impression for me from the report is what I said earlier, the line about the prevention remains the most cost-effective and permanent solutions to the challenges we're seeing. And I want to make sure that we are matching in terms of our policy strength as well as future investment. I also see this as an opportunity to maybe start to incorporate some of the things that perhaps that's on my radar, but that hasn't quite made it into the CSWB conversation, including Building Safer Neighborhood program, for example. Potentially be under this strategy. Perhaps there's already the direction there for this program to be preventative in nature. A while back, we've had a chance to listen to Dr. Irvin Waller, and I know lots of people in this room are familiar with his work on violence prevention, and he was in town to talk about the topic, and specifically how youth support and youth work is really critical to this. And I think that really resonated with me, and so I'm very interested to hear what are other types of research-based tools. I was going to mention Boston as well, and I think they have a pretty excellent framework focused around prevention, intervention, and recovery. Glasgow has one, or has done some excellent work in this space as well. So I just like us to build a research-based, community co-created violence prevention action plan. And I guess just a final note I wanted to mention is that, there are certainly lots of convening agencies. We've heard from many today, and they're all doing great work. And I do think I want to distinguish the goal with something like this, is really setting that systems level coordination and direction for that strategy. And so, it could also play a role in coordinating and info sharing with provincial initiatives, such as Safety Task Force, that the coordination with the province certainly came up. And I think that's also part of the intent here, and it's not exclusively focused on, program and service delivery. So really appreciate, committee considering this subsequent, and I hope you support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Please vote.
Sorry, before we go to vote, just a little clarity on what we're voting. So I just made a small edit, if you don't mind. The administration provided a report outlining the development of a violence prevention action plan. And yeah, the report will, along with the memo, will come back in first quarter 2025.
Yes.
Just a small edit, because in the discussion you said you wanted a report back.
Changing it from framework. Oh.
A report back. Provide a
midway
report.
Through? A report back
to committee of first quarter 2025.
Oh, yes, I believe that's correct. I believe.
So I have a question, because I changed it to the development of the action plan.
Oh.
No change to that, just the administration provide a report outlining the development of a violence prevention action plan in collaboration with partners.
Then I have a question.
You have a question?
Because they changed the wording, and then based on what's the previous we speak on the floor.
When did the wording change?
No, based on the discussion, my understanding was that you guys wanted a report back instead of just directing admin to do the work.
Right.
You wanted them to report back instead of.
Right.
Yeah, I just added to provide a report.
Okay, to provide a report. And can you explain your concern, Councillor?
Yeah, so my question is, right now they change to just take this long to just provide a report back instead of like my original understanding is based on original
action plan.
Based on original wording is actually the action plan itself. That is my original understanding, unless I missed something. But right now, they provide reports take that long, and over one year just provide a report back. So can you provide the clarification on this? And then that means we have to, because this motion is just provide a report back. And then in 2025, quarter one, once we receive a report, and then we discuss the implementation for the action plan.
I think
so is this understanding correct?
I think the intention, and it might be the wording, is just that we will come back with the report that will have the violence prevention action plan in it. That we are not going to outline what it's going to be, but that it'll be a report, and inside the report we'll have the action plan in it, as opposed to just, unless of course, I don't know, are we allowed to just come with an action plan? I think we have to put it inside there. I think the report is the vehicle through which we give you the action plan.
Okay, that's just the action plan in the report, and instead of the action plan itself.
Correct. So we might want to say that administration provide a report with the violence prevention action plan.
Okay.
Administration provide a report outlining the action plan, something along the lines. But the report has to be brought back. It's just.
But to me, then is that we
okay,
need that
thank you. Let's get this meeting back into order. So I think administration understands the intention. that we will get an action plan with this. So I'll just ask my colleagues if they're comfortable. And I will ask us to vote now.
So I still have concern, and Mayor, Chair Principe, and what's the procedure for me to address my concern?
We can address it. We can go over it again.
Yeah, can you please?
Well, I'll send it. I can send the motion in the chat. Quick break, and we can fully understand what the concerns are.
Well, how about if we do that? How about if we take our
Just ask.
Okay, go
Also,
ahead.
well, when is the latest reports come back, and in terms of this CSWB strategy, back to the committee or back to the council?
I don't have that information, but when the CSWB is coming back, but I
Yeah.
can speak to the intention of the Violence Prevention Action Plan would be created and brought to committee Q1 2025.
So that means we don't have action plan and then as a part of the this strategy right now until Q1 2025.
Correct. The strategy is iterative, and the work across 7 pillars is happening it ebbs and flows, and so that is the intention to deliver that work first quarter 2025.
Is that possible? And then I just want to get a sense from my colleagues and the mayor, and include the motion mover as well, because I'm asking what is the next time, and you will bring report updates back to the council. Is that possible for the same time you bring that report back to us and to outline the action plan? And at that moment, we can discuss about the implementation action.
Our plan regarding CSWB updates is to provide a quarterly memo to council, so that is the rhythm that we have. But if council wishes or committee wishes to have another opportunity to talk about CSWB, we can certainly discuss what that timing could look like.
So we don't have the specific dates for when you come back.
No, we don't.
Okay, so what I'm thinking, I try to think in, and if we could align that time and then put that date there, and when you provide the report back, and we can have the urgent discussion and how we implemented that.
I think that the thinking of our team is that the strategy for CSWB has been set. We have our pillars, we have a lot of our action plans already in place, and it is our hope that a quarterly memo would provide the updates that council would be interested in. So that was our thinking.
Yeah, I have no problem for that. I just focus on this action plan, and because right now this is urgent. The violence prevention is urgent, and that is actually a very important piece. And if we could get early than just the first quarter, if based on the report, the city provided the report. The report could come back earlier instead of the first quarter of 2025.
Yeah, I never want to overpromise and underdeliver. I am aware of our constraints for our resourcing. We are happy to provide a memo midway in terms of our updates, and if we can get things done faster, I would work with clerks to bring it forward sooner.
Okay, sure. And then I saw the wording change, just leading the development, and I'm happy. And if you can provide the memo and midway, that's fine. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think I can ask my colleagues to vote now. Okay, thank you.
We have 5 votes.
Please display the vote. And that has carried. So item 6.1 is done. On to item 6.2. I see we are at 3:26 right now. I'm just going to call for our speaker to see if Brooks Hanowich has joined us. Brooks, are you there?
We got word that he may not be joining us.
Okay, so we do not have a speaker for this item, and we've already had the presentation from administration. And we did start questions of administration. Would my colleagues like to continue, or do we have many questions to administration for this item? You have a couple? Well, please go ahead, Councillor Paquette.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. As the delegation approaches, I will ask slowly. So it's a great report, thank you. And I've got two issues that I want to touch on. One is anonymized data for procurement, and it says that we'll have some solutions or some ideas by the end of 2023. So I'd like to just get some information on that, and then I'll get to my next point.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Paquette. So first question is on Indigenous procurement. So Jennifer, I'll leave that to you to answer that, please.
Thank you. This was regarding to the data collection piece.
Yeah, and paired with procurement.
So right now what we're doing is we're collecting voluntary data on if businesses are Indigenous when we're sort of enabling them in our system. So the data is obviously connected to the business themselves. And then when it comes to, sorry about that, when it comes to actual businesses bidding on work where they have to meet heritage verification requirements, then they have to go through a process that way. So in terms of collecting the data, it's not anonymous, but in terms of reporting on it, I suppose we could report on it anonymously, and we likely would.
Well, the reason I ask is because it gets tricky when we start asking for Indigenous identity and verification and things like that. And I know that there are some options or solutions out there where people can actually do that, and then that individual gets anonymized in the data, but you can track the anonymized data. And so you can track businesses that are doing this, but also individuals who are working for different businesses as they come and go or remain. And that way we can actually get an accurate count on how we were doing this. And we also avoid what happened in Calgary. And I might as well just say it, when Councillor Dan McLean said that he potentially, let's just say, let's get Dan McLean's name out of my mouth, and we'll just say there's a councillor in Calgary who potentially falsified some records on Indigenous employment. And so how can we avoid that?
So that's certainly part of the piece of the Indigenous procurement framework that we're looking at and how to implement it and how to move forward with it. I don't think we have all the answers at this point, but it's something that's come up and that, yeah, we definitely need to do some more work on.
Okay. All right. I don't think I'm telling stories out of school. This was in an open forum in an official public council meeting. Okay. So, all right. So that's good. Maybe we can have a conversation offline about different approaches. Would that be okay?
What we can do, Councillor Paquette, is follow up with an information memo in terms of what we're working on currently. Yep. And should that still, you've got other questions, we can follow up offline.
Okay. And at that time when we maybe chat offline, we can talk about when we'll get an update on that work?
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Okay, I don't want to try to peg you right now. Okay, so, and next, I was just wondering about reading in the report about urban reserves and how that's mostly in the purview of the federal government, and a nation has to sort of work with the federal government, and they instigate that. It's not instigated by municipality at all. We just act as a convener of desires if that happens. But what I'm wondering about is, are we proactive in talking with nations and saying, look, have you considered this? This is how it would work with the city of Edmonton, and we can maybe work as a team in order to go forward to the federal government to do this, because a lot of times without the knowledge or even knowing that the municipality would be interested in this, many nations might not even avail themselves of the option.
Is Jamie on the line, our Indigenous Relations Office, to speak to this?
If not, that's another thing that I guess we can get back to.
We can follow up with you on that one, Councillor Paquette.
Okay. All right. And do we have any concerns about doing that, about being maybe more proactive partners in order to do that? Because it could solve a number of things like really rapid housing building, obviously employment in the city, so on and so forth. Any concerns?
So I can't speak specifically to the concerns. I know with our truth and reconciliation work, it's very important that we are working in partnership. So we'd have to take a look at where we're at currently to see if there are concerns on how we would do that specifically.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm out of time.
Thank you. And we are at break time now, so we will convene back here at 3:47. Thank you. Okay, great. I'm going to call this meeting back to order. Next, we'll go on, or we'll do a quick roll call. I see Mayor Sohi.
Here.
Hello. Councillor Rice.
Here.
Hello, Councillor Knack.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councillor Paquette.
Hello.
Hello. And we have Councillor Stevenson online with us.
Hi there.
Hi there. And I believe that is all that's remaining in the meeting. Okay, now we'll go next to Mayor Sohi. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the work that we're doing on the Indigenous procurement. I'm glad that we have it in place. I just want to know how we up our game on communications to get the word out. Business friendly Edmonton, absolutely. There's some uptake, right? How we can increase that uptake. I understand on the economic action plan there has not been any uptake from Indigenous businesses. So just want to get a sense, what are we doing to just increase the awareness?
Thanks. So on the procurement front, we're sort of taking a number of different tacks, I guess, to try to get the word out. We're actually working with my colleagues to the right to probably do some like selling to the city type sessions, perhaps more focused to the Indigenous business community. We're reaching out to Axis, which is a Indigenous membership. So we have regular meetings with them and trying to find out from them how to engage. We're considering doing sort of a trade show type of thing. So we're going to reach out to, the general community that works on, larger infrastructure projects and figure out, as well as with the Indigenous business community, to sort of figure out how we can make those partnerships work. So those are kind of some of the tactics we're taking, but we're sort of still working through a lot of that. So a lot of that is still being developed, how that outreach is going to work, because that's a really important part to understand capacity.
Do we know the timelines when that outreach will start?
Probably in the fall of this year, and then probably maybe that larger trade show type thing would likely not be until spring of next year.
Okay. Do we report annually on the procurement, Indigenous procurement progress? Like what is the report mechanism for council to kind of know the success and the progress on the Indigenous procurement?
There's an annual procurement report, and so that went, I think it was in May of this past year. So
come next
it would come next May, and then that the whole sustainable procurement and Indigenous procurement piece would be reported.
Do you think we will see some more progress by next May on some of the uptakes?
Yeah, I sure
Hopefully.
hope so.
That's your goal?
That's our goal, yeah.
Okay, well, I look forward to that too. We also heard from, there's a demand for kind of cultural aspect of the Indigenous businesses. I understand the Orange Hub had a workshop that they held related to Indigenous regalia, and there was a wait list. And there's more, people are connecting with the culture, and that provides business opportunities for Indigenous community members, right? How are we supporting some of that outreach to universities or some of the other colleges and other mechanisms to make them aware about what is available?
And just to clarify, you're referring to supporting businesses that are putting on like cultural type activities or regalia making, or I've signed up for some. Okay. Yeah. So one way that we are getting the word out and doing more outreach, we are part of an inclusive entrepreneurship roundtable through MacEwan University. So that's been a great way to connect with other organizations that are serving Indigenous entrepreneurs. But that work is just getting underway. So we haven't quite identified some gaps. So I think what I'm hearing is maybe there is an opportunity to do more of that outreach and support this, I guess, growing industry and trend in businesses for sure.
Working with the UFA, I think they have an organization that relates to business growth as well, and as students in the business faculty. I think there might be other ways of expanding that outreach.
Yeah, wonderful. I will definitely follow up to find out the U of A contact. I know we've got some great connections with student
with students in entrepreneurship at McEwen, but we'll definitely make sure we're touching on all the post-secondaries.
I also understand that like high schools have some sort of indigenous outreach as well, right? So that could be another mechanism to explore. Bottom line is, we just need to make sure that indigenous businesses are aware that they can work with the city, right? They can sell their products to the city, they can do business with the city. And we just need to up that game. That's what I'm getting at. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson?
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate the report. Just want to clarify in terms of the long-term intent, and I apologize if I missed this, but are we, with the additional collection of some demographic information or race-based data, is the intent that our annual procurement report would break down the value of contracts based on some of that extended demographic information?
I think that the last report that went to council did not break down the demographic information, but that's certainly something we could look at going forward. Obviously, trying to figure out how much spend is going towards diverse and Indigenous-owned businesses.
Yeah, that would certainly be the intent. I think, you know, having some of those key quantitative metrics to sort of measure progress and understand how our policies are translating into those real world outcomes, I think could be very helpful. Recognizing that it's probably, you know, a work in progress in terms of getting all of that data from all vendors, and recognizing that that will need to happen over time. I certainly would be interested in just making sure that we have a sense of if we're actually moving the needle on the value of contracts that are going out. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Paquette?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, I noticed that in the report there's a lot of resources offered outside of the City of Edmonton organization for folks to avail themselves of as well. And I'm just wondering if someone approaches us, or we're being proactive and approach others and say, okay, so this is what we have, rather than just opening a portal and expecting people to walk in, and on the off chance they do, which would be great, that we provide a pathway for them to avail themselves of these, so that we don't just say, well, all of these things are available, good luck. Like, do we actually have sort of like a way that we help people along, keep track of them, say, have you done this, and this is another step, or if you've done this step, come back to us?
We do. So under Business Friendly Edmonton, we've got one-on-one business supports, and so available to any business in Edmonton, including Indigenous businesses. So if an Indigenous business comes to us at the city through one-on-one, and we're working with them, and they need something that the city doesn't have but one of our partners, whether it's through City Enabled or other agencies, we refer them. So we've got a really great referral program that we work with all of our partners, and it's two-way. So if there is something the city offers that one of our partners is not able to offer, they will refer those businesses into Edmonton. So really trying to look after business, Indigenous business, as a full business, rather than bouncing them around like a ball and trying to have them navigate. We help them do that.
Right, so sort of a bit of a concierge service.
A little bit.
In order to allow businesses to actually form so that they can work with the City of Edmonton.
Yes.
Brilliant. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette. Would you like to move a motion or move to receive for information?
Yeah, no, I'll put receipt on the floor. I'm not sure if we need a motion just yet. We'll have some conversations going forward, and maybe something will arise out of there, but so far so good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we have on the floor to receive for information. Anyone to speak to it?
Just
Mayor
quickly, and again, I stress this point, this is very important undertaking for the city to ensure that we continue to apply equity lens to everything that we do, including access to for businesses from equity-seeking groups. Indigenous communities, we all know, have been underrepresented when it comes to opportunities for accessing what city has to offer. And we have an Indigenous procurement framework in place. There are other policies that drive this work, and we need to make sure that we're demonstrating progress on this, right? And I appreciate the good work being done, and let's continue to build on it, and let's continue to identify where the gaps are, and try to close those gaps. Yeah, we need to. It's a very important work, yeah, that we're undertaking. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Sohi. Councillor Paquette?
Yeah, just to close, echo all those words and add even better ones. I'm kidding. It's the end of the day. No, thank you very much for this. This is something that we've been working on for a long time, and to see it developing and going forward is really great. There's a few steps we can take further, I think, but we'll do that over time. And this is one of those great news stories about reconciliation, where there are things that we can do as a municipality that are tangible, that can actually help people. And it's something that we can keep evolving. And it's rare to find these really bright spots, and your team represents that. So thank you so much for that, and hope that committee supports this receiving of information.
Well said. Thank you. Please vote.
We have 5 votes.
Please display the vote. And that has carried. Thank you. So item 6.2 is done. Responses to councillors' inquiries, none. Private reports, none. Motions pending, none. Notices of motion and motions without customary notice? Doesn't appear so. So we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.